"You never trusted me," Aisha said. Her voice did not shake. It did not rise. It cut straight through the room. "You trusted your image, your company, your name, but never me." Evan Tanner stood in front of the press podium, hands still, jaw tight. He did not interrupt. He did not defend himself. For the first time, silence failed him. Aisha took one step forward, not toward him, toward the truth she had carried alone. The room waited. Reporters paused mid-motion. No one expected her to speak first. No one expected her to speak at all. "You knew who I was," she continued. "You knew what I gave up." Her eyes stayed on his. "You just decided I was easy to doubt." A flash went off, then another. Evan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Aisha exhaled once. Slow, controlled. "This is where I stop protecting you." She turned away before anyone could stop her. And in that moment, everything Evan built began to crack. The room was a wall of sound and flash. Voices overlapped. Questions flew. Phones hovered in the air, recording every movement. It wasn't a small event. It was a press conference Evan Tanner's team had planned for weeks. A full floor at the Waldorf in Manhattan. Red carpet at the entrance. Gold logos behind the podium. Dozens of journalists lined shoulder to shoulder. The event was meant to announce a global partnership, to cement Evan's image as a forward-thinking CEO. He was supposed to walk in, shake hands, and leave headlines behind him. He didn't expect Aisha to be there. She entered the room unannounced. No badge, no mic, just presence. Every camera shifted the moment she stepped up. She didn't wait for permission, didn't glance at the PR team, didn't blink. "You want to talk legacy?" she asked, standing beside the stage. "Start by telling them what you left behind." Gasps were quiet but real. The room snapped into stillness. Every lens turned toward her. Evan's hand gripped the edge of the podium. His face didn't move, but his world had already changed. Her words didn't rise over the room. They sliced through it. Clear, direct, personal. Every conversation stopped. "You don't get to rewrite what happened," she said, loud enough for the cameras. "Not here. Not while I'm still standing." Reporters lowered their phones, listening now. Real listening. The kind that shifts a room. Someone in the front row whispered, "Is she the assistant?" Another said, "That's her, the one from Paris." Evan didn't look at his team. He didn't call security. He didn't correct her. Because she wasn't wrong. Aisha's voice held more than defiance. It held history. "You sent me home with silence," she said, stepping closer. "Now I'm giving your silence a name." She stopped in the center aisle. Evan was less than 10 feet away. "Tell them about the calls you never returned, the lawyers you sent, the deals you offered. All because I refused to vanish quietly." A single camera light switched on. Then another. The room wasn't listening for a story anymore. They were witnessing one. If you've ever given your all and still been doubted, comment, "I see you" below and keep watching. Evan Tanner had faced boardrooms full of critics. He'd survived market crashes, lawsuits, even betrayal by partners. But not this. Not a woman who knew the weight of his choices better than anyone, and wasn't afraid to hold them up, publicly. Aisha didn't shake. She didn't smile. She didn't let him look away. The lights didn't flicker, but everything else did. The polished calm of the event cracked around them. A reporter leaned forward. "Miss Clark, are you confirming?" "Let him speak," she cut in, still watching Evan. "He owes them more than numbers today." Evan shifted finally. One step forward. Still, no words. Not yet. The crowd waited. Phones recorded every second. Not because of who he was, but because of who she became. He had kept her name out of headlines. She just placed it back, with power. Aisha turned, slowly, and walked past the front row. Not rushed, not afraid. She didn't need to stay. The silence behind her spoke louder than any headline. No one followed. No one asked her to stop. At the door she paused. Not for him, for herself. She looked over her shoulder once. "You taught me to speak less," she said. But silence let you lie longer. Then she left. Evan stood at the mic, eyes fixed on the exit. He hadn't said a single word. The event didn't end. It collapsed. The cameras were still rolling when the screen cut to black. I took a temp assistant job for a billionaire CEO. Then my pregnancy exposed everything. Aisha Clark never planned on becoming someone's assistant. She had plans once, big ones. A gallery space on the Lower East Side. Her name printed in white on glass. Acrylic-stained fingers. Late nights spent chasing light on canvas. But dreams don't pay late rent or erase collection calls. She stared at the final notice taped to her door, phone screen glowing with another overdraft text. Her refrigerator hummed quietly in the background. Inside, a half-empty milk carton, mustard, and 3 eggs. She'd made the last stretch of groceries last longer than she should have. That morning, she sold one of her larger canvases on an online app, not for its worth, but for rent money. Art wasn't dying. But survival didn't wait for artistic freedom, not in Manhattan. When the recruiter called, Aisha thought it was spam. She almost ignored it. "It's a temp role," the woman said crisply. "Executive assistant to the CEO of Tanner Enterprises. Very short term. 6 weeks. Extremely competitive pay. Tanner Enterprises." The name made her sit up. She knew the company. Everyone did. Evan Tanner wasn't just a businessman. He was a symbol. Tech brilliance, discipline, emotional detachment wrapped in billionaire polish. Articles called him the architect of digital empires, the man who never smiled on camera. The recruiter mentioned travel, long hours, discretion. She mentioned it twice. Aisha had no experience as an executive assistant, but she could organize, multitask, and stay quiet. Poverty teaches you how to listen more than speak. She didn't celebrate when she was offered the position. She didn't tell her friends. She ironed her only blazer, tied her hair in a low bun, and arrived 10 minutes early on her first day. Because this was survival, nothing more. Evan Tanner didn't look up when Aisha entered. The walls of his office were glass, minimalist, designed for intimidation. Everything sharp, clean, white, chrome. The skyline framed him like he belonged to it. He signed the final line of a document, clicked the pen closed, and handed it off without eye contact. "You're late." She wasn't, but she didn't correct him. "Sit." He ran meetings like depositions. Short sentences, no filler. He asked questions with answers already in mind, more to gauge reaction than gather input. Aisha noticed his rhythm quickly. He never asked twice. He never said thank you. His words were tools, not gestures. She worked quickly, diligently. She took notes with precision. She adjusted schedules without errors. She anticipated what he needed and delivered it without waiting to be asked. "Still," he corrected her, "often. Don't assume I want fluff in my briefings. Facts, that's it. Your email reply was too warm. We're not their friends. You signed the package. That makes you liable. It wasn't personal." That was the first rule of Evan Tanner. Never take anything personally. His staff avoided direct contact. Most meetings were one way. His calendar didn't show meetings longer than 12 minutes, and he dismissed people mid-sentence if they repeated themselves. But he never dismissed Aisha. He corrected her, observed her, but never asked her to leave. That was how she knew she was doing something right. She noticed it by the 3rd week, the way his eyes followed her when she moved across the room. Not with admiration, with calculation, like he couldn't quite place her. Aisha was used to attention. Her beauty was quiet but firm. Warm-toned skin, wide, expressive eyes. A stillness that made people underestimate her. But Evan didn't flirt. He didn't banter. He watched. He never made inappropriate comments. Never asked personal questions. But his gaze lingered too long when she entered meetings. He tested her memory, asking her to recite facts she hadn't seen in weeks. He gave her tasks others wouldn't touch, and tracked how she handled them. One morning he asked, "Why take a job this far outside your field?" She blinked. "Because I needed it." That honest or strategic? You decide. Something shifted. Briefly. It wasn't romance. It wasn't desire. It was something more dangerous. Interest. He saw her as more than a temp. And she realized he didn't trust proximity, but he also didn't ignore it. It came in an email. No subject line. Just flight details. She was to accompany him to a business gala in Paris. Tanner Enterprises was being honored for innovation in global design systems. He didn't ask if she was available. He assumed she would be. She printed itineraries, arranged security clearance, double-checked seating assignments. She packed a single carry-on with one black dress, one formal blouse, and the same low bun she always wore. The flight was quiet. He worked. She reviewed logistics. When he handed her a file mid-flight, their fingers brushed. Neither moved away immediately. They arrived late. Rain glazed the runway. The gala was held in a glass ballroom overlooking the Seine. She kept to the shadows, managing schedules, shielding him from pointless small talk. But at some point, the ballroom thinned out. The music softened. Lights dimmed. She was still by the window, updating notes. He stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "You don't like me," she said quietly. "I don't trust people who want proximity," he replied. She looked at him finally. "I never asked for yours." He didn't respond. But he didn't leave either. Paris gave them space, time, distance from the cold precision of New York. And in that space, something opened, not explosive, not reckless, but undeniable. They didn't speak about it the next morning. He left early. The message came later. "This changes nothing." And for a while, she let it stay that way. The sky over Paris didn't whisper that night. It poured. Glass walls of the ballroom trembled under sheets of rain. Outside, streetlights flickered behind streaked windows. The gala had started with flash and sound. Wine poured. Guests smiled for cameras. Music swelled with imported elegance. By midnight, the storm had taken over. Umbrellas collapsed under weight. Valets delayed departures. Taxis backed up at the entrance. Inside, only a handful of guests remained, too important or too indifferent to rush off. Aisha stood at the edge of the room, tablet in hand, scanning flight delays and updated schedules. Her black dress clung slightly to her frame, not from design, but from the humidity pressing through the doors. She didn't expect him to still be there. Evan Tanner stood a few feet away, near the far window, hands clasped loosely behind him. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't on his phone. He was just watching the skyline drown in shadows. Their eyes met briefly. He didn't look away. She hesitated, then stepped closer. The cars delayed. "At least 40 minutes, she said softly. He gave a small nod. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Not warm either. Just space neither tried to fill. Music faded to nothing. Even the staff began clearing trays with muted steps. The ballroom, once gold and noise, dimmed to grey and quiet. Only the two of them remained in that silence. Her with her schedule, him with something he wasn't saying. "You don't like people," Aisha said finally, without looking at him. "I don't trust easy affection." She nodded slowly. "That's not the same as disliking people." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She turned to face him. Her earrings caught the light, a soft glint against the gloom. "You didn't grow up around warmth, did you?" His mouth twitched. Not a smile. Something else. "My father built things. Schedules, standards, silence." "Your mother?" "Left when I was 8. Aisha let the quiet settle again. He tilted his head. "You?" She shrugged. "Grew up between cousins, aunts. Too many people in one house. Not enough walls. Sounds loud." It was. But also safe. He didn't respond. She looked out the window. "When did pressure stop feeling heavy for you?" "It didn't. I just learned to ignore the weight. That's not the same as letting it go." He looked at her then. Really looked. "No, it's not." The conversation wasn't long. It wasn't detailed. But something real passed between them. A pause in performance. A quiet truth between two people too tired to perform. They stopped speaking, but they didn't move apart. Aisha turned back to her tablet. I should confirm the reroute on your flight. She swiped through tabs, double-checking departure times. He leaned slightly to see over her shoulder. She shifted the screen to give him a better view. That one, he said, pointing. She tapped the folder, pulling it up. Their hands brushed. Neither moved, not right away. The contact was brief, soft, but startling. Aisha didn't step back. Neither did he. It wasn't charged. It wasn't planned. But it wasn't small either. A moment passed. She clicked the screen off, slowly, and lowered the tablet. Their fingers parted, but his eyes stayed on hers. You're different here, he said. Here? Away from the office. So are you. That was true. His voice was lower. His stance less guarded. Even the tilt of his head held less tension. Outside, thunder cracked, followed by a brief blackout across the street. A flicker. Then lights returned. Inside, still. They stood. The silence was no longer heavy. It was curious, inviting. He didn't reach for her. Not at first. She turned toward the window again, arms crossed lightly. Her reflection stared back, layered over Paris. You know what this isn't, she said quietly. Yes. And what it can't be. I do. She met his eyes. Then why are you still standing here? Because I want to know what it feels like, before I don't allow myself to. The room held its breath. Evan moved slowly. No sudden gesture, no heat, just presence. He stopped inches from her. Aisha tilted her face up. There was no rush. When his hand finally touched the side of her neck, it was with restraint so firm it hurt. The kiss wasn't urgent. It was quiet, deliberate. A question, not a claim. And she answered, not with her body, not with pressure, with stillness. When they stepped back, nothing needed to be said. No one else saw it. No one else would ever be told. But it happened, and for one night, both of them let go of the roles they wore too tightly. Not as boss and assistant, not as protector and protected. Just two people, in the rain, beneath a city that didn't ask questions. Paris gave them that. The morning after, the air in the suite was still. Heavy, but calm. Aisha woke alone. The chair near the window sat empty, the table cleared, his coat gone. For a few seconds, she stayed still, unsure whether last night had happened or if it had just lived in her imagination. She reached for her phone. A single message blinked on the screen. This was a lapse in judgment. It cannot continue. No greeting, no name, no punctuation beyond the full stop. It took her a moment to absorb it. Not even a call. Not even an in-person dismissal. He had left long before she opened her eyes, and he had done it with less warmth than he offered his board members. She stared at the message for a full minute before placing the phone face down. No tears came, not yet. Just the weight of finality. It was efficient, like everything else he did. Still, she stayed in the room for another hour, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the skyline outside the window. She hadn't expected promises, but she hadn't expected to be discarded either. The same man who shared childhood memories near the window, who kissed her with such quiet care, now decided she didn't fit the world he was returning to. With one line, he made sure she knew she was a mistake he would never repeat. Her ticket home was moved to an earlier flight. He hadn't arranged a driver. There was no note from the office. Not even the assistant who managed logistics had followed up. Aisha dragged her small carry-on through the hotel lobby with practiced posture. Her dress was neatly folded in her suitcase, her hair tied up. No signs of distress, no trace of the storm that had just passed through her life. At the airport, she avoided the business lounge and chose a quiet seat near Gate 38. Every now and then, she saw flashes of the gala night appear on news alerts. Articles praising Evan Tanner's poised leadership. A few speculative headlines about who he was standing beside in the ballroom. Nothing confirmed. Her face wasn't in any of them. And even if it had been, No one would recognize her. She was just the assistant, temporary, replaceable. The plane boarded late. The rain hadn't stopped. Her seat was in business class, still under the company ticket, but she pressed herself against the window and spoke to no one. During takeoff, she let the tears fall. Not loud, not visible to anyone else, but steady. By the time the plane broke through the clouds, her face was calm again. She landed in New York just before dawn. The city was still asleep, grey and groggy. No driver waited. She called her own ride, took it back to her small apartment, closed the door, and sat on the floor for 2 hours. There were no messages from him when she checked again. And now, she understood. He hadn't just ended what happened in Paris. He had ended her. Aisha didn't spiral. She reset. She stopped checking her phone for messages that would never come. She unsubscribed from news updates. She returned the company-issued tablet via overnight courier and requested no further contact with Tanner Enterprises. She went back to her paints. At first, her strokes were stiff, disconnected. But over time, the colors returned. The lines sharpened. A rhythm settled back into her hands. She repurposed an old cabinet into a drying rack, sold 2 smaller canvases online, bought groceries with the money and paid off one lingering bill. Some nights, she sat in silence for hours. No music, no television, just her thoughts and a candle burning low on the windowsill. She took freelance work again, branding sketches, digital art commissions. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid, and it kept her hands busy. Friends noticed she was quieter. She told them she was tired. They didn't press. What she didn't say, how it felt to be opened and then discarded. How it felt to be seen in a moment of honesty, only to have it framed as a mistake. But she didn't let it make her bitter. She refused to let one man's coldness turn her own heart to stone. That was the victory. Not revenge, not visibility, but peace. And peace, she learned, was earned through choosing not to chase closure. Weeks passed. Spring touched the city in small ways, softer air, brighter mornings. She planted herbs on her windowsill and replaced her heavy curtains with lighter ones. She blocked his number, not because she expected a call, but because she didn't want to hope. Her email inbox stayed clean. Her phone rang less, but the silence, once painful, began to feel like freedom. Aisha started a new piece in mid-April. It was large, abstract, harsher than her usual work. Strong reds, deep greens, movement without symmetry. Her mentor came by to see it and stared for a long time. "You've grown," he said quietly. She nodded. "I had to." He offered her a spot in a small group exhibition for early summer. She accepted, quietly, no fanfare. That night, she stood in front of the piece and whispered to herself, "No one gets to shrink me again." She didn't need to write it down. She didn't need to scream it out. It was already done. She chose herself. No farewell message, no angry confrontation, no dramatic closure. Just the quiet, firm decision to never go back to someone who treated her like an error. And that was how her future began. It started with an email from a former colleague, one Aisha barely remembered. Short-term event contract, it read. Tanner Enterprises. High-level press coordination. One-day obligation. You came highly recommended. Interested? Her stomach tightened at the name. But she didn't delete it. She stared at the screen for a full 5 minutes, scrolling through the attachment outlining logistics. Location, date, 1 day, no meetings, no office return. Just a press event team lead needing coverage. Aisha hadn't heard from Evan since Paris. This wasn't from him. The message came through an agency, faceless and formal. It could have gone to anyone. She didn't need the job. Her art sales had picked up. Bills were getting paid. But something about the request made her pause. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and stared out the window. The city buzzed, detached from her memories. It wasn't about reconnecting. She wasn't walking in hoping for answers or apologies. This was about her. She needed to walk into that building and know she could stand in the same air, the same space, and feel nothing break. So, she typed 2 words, "I accept," and closed the laptop. The conference was held at a downtown hotel, sleek, polished, glass elevators, red carpets, rows of chairs draped in white. Tanner Enterprises was launching a new global AI platform. Evan Tanner would speak at exactly 11 a.m. Aisha arrived early. She wore black slacks, a fitted blazer, and low heels. Her hair was pinned neatly. Clipboard in hand, headset looped around her ear, she looked like every other operations lead in the room. Except her palms wouldn't stop sweating. She kept her distance from the main stage, managing sound cues and media check-ins. Every few minutes she adjusted earpieces, nodded at photographers, and crossed names off printed lists. Then the elevator dinged. Evan stepped out. Surrounded by his legal team, PR reps, and 2 security aides, he walked straight through the hallway like nothing in the world could touch him. She didn't expect a glance. She didn't get one. That should have made it easier. But her breath hitched. Not out of love. Out of the body remembering pain before the mind gave it permission. She moved toward the far side of the ballroom. 10 minutes to go, a voice said in her ear. Copy. Her hands trembled slightly. She clutched the clipboard tighter, breathing through the tension. The room buzzed louder, camera flashes popping as high-level guests filed in. 5 minutes. She adjusted a mic, nodded at a crew member, and reached for a bottle of water. That's when it hit. Sharp, sudden. The world tilted. Sound became thick. Her stomach twisted. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. And then she dropped. Gasps, running feet. She barely heard them. Only the hum of overhead lights and the spinning inside her chest. When Aisha opened her eyes, the lights above her blurred slightly. She was on her back. Someone was kneeling beside her. Don't move yet, a medic said gently. You fainted. Just breathe. She blinked slowly. Her pulse roared in her ears. Sweat lined her forehead. The room smelled of cologne and electronics. A crowd had gathered, but event security was already pushing them back. Someone held up a curtain. I'm okay, she whispered. Still, we need to check you, the medic insisted. Within minutes, she was wheeled into a private lounge behind the ballroom. 4 lines started, vitals monitored. Her vision cleared slowly. Are you pregnant? The nurse asked softly. Aisha froze. We found this in your bag, she said, holding up a sealed envelope. Aisha's hands trembled as she took it. She'd visited the clinic 2 days before. She hadn't opened the results. Not yet. Her fingers tore the edge carefully. Her breath shallow. She read once, then again. Positive, viable intrauterine pregnancy. Gestational markers consistent with twin development. Her eyes filled with something too heavy to name. You're stable, the nurse said, but you need follow-up care. And rest. Aisha nodded slowly. The nurse continued, Do you have someone you want us to call? Aisha looked toward the door. Voices echoed on the other side. Her heart beat harder, but her voice came steady. No, I'm fine. Outside, the press room was chaos. The event had halted. Guests murmured. Reporters whispered across rows. The Tanner team scrambled to control the narrative. And Evan Tanner stood still. A junior associate whispered updates in his ear. She fainted. Back room, stable. Medics say she's okay. He didn't move. The name registered, but his body didn't react. Then the second update came. Preliminary report says she's pregnant. His face stayed blank, but his jaw tensed. The air between his eyes tightened. He looked toward the hallway leading to the lounge. Twins, the associate added quietly. The cameras didn't miss it. One caught the second he blinked, a flicker of something breaking through. Another caught the movement in his throat as he swallowed hard. Someone in the crowd murmured, Was that his assistant? No one confirmed. No one denied it. Evan took a step forward, then stopped. Aisha was in the next room, carrying 2 lives that were half his, and the entire world was watching. For the first time in years, Evan Tanner had no script, no speech, no exit strategy, only silence. And every lens pointed directly at him. The next morning, a car arrived outside Aisha's apartment. She hadn't asked for it. The driver, dressed in black, held out an envelope. Inside were documents, confidentiality agreements, medical referrals, and a letter with Tanner Enterprises letterhead. No apology, no personal note, just logistics. A team of private doctors had already been assigned. A townhouse in the Upper East Side had been secured for her use, fully staffed, discreet, and paid for 6 months in advance. A lawyer followed up via email. This agreement ensures your privacy and your well-being. Aisha didn't respond. She skimmed the pages instead, noting the language, containment, reputational management, liability limitations. It wasn't about care. It was about control. Evan had moved swiftly. Her name, once invisible in boardrooms and press releases, was now a threat to neutralize. Within 48 hours, 2 company reps called her phone. "We're here to support your next steps. We want to protect your future. Evan values your privacy." She didn't answer any of them. Instead, she opened her own notebook, wrote down her next prenatal appointment, and called her public clinic back to confirm. She would keep the date, on her own terms. By the end of the week, Evan Tanner requested a meeting. Not at the office, not through intermediaries, in person. He arrived at her apartment in the evening, unannounced, in a charcoal coat, collar turned up against the cold. She opened the door slowly. No greeting. He spoke first. "You need better protection." "I have a lock," she replied flatly. He didn't smile. "We need to discuss what comes next." She stepped aside without offering coffee or a seat. Evan stood near the window. His voice didn't rise. His tone remained clinical. "There will be questions. Eventually the press will find out. You need security. Proper care." "I have a doctor. That clinic isn't enough. It is for me." He paused, adjusting his cufflinks. "Aisha, this involves more than you now." "You mean your reputation?" He looked at her then, briefly. "You're carrying my children. That matters. To your board. Or to you." A beat. "This isn't about emotions, it's about legacy." And there it was. He said the word like a man used to protecting institutions, not people. He offered legal assurances, inheritance options, structured trust funds, media buffers. It was all airtight, all rehearsed. But Aisha heard what was missing: care, not compensation, human concern, not corporate foresight. The next morning, she sent everything back. The contract, the housing offer, the medical forms, all returned via secured courier. No thank you note, no follow-up. She expected a reaction. She got silence, until a third-party representative showed up at her door 2 days later. "Ms. Clark, I strongly advise you to reconsider," the woman said, voice clipped. "This isn't personal, it's precaution." "Exactly," Aisha replied, arms crossed. "The townhouse offers full privacy, 24-hour care, and a cage with velvet wallpaper." The woman blinked. "Excuse me? You want me somewhere you can control access, keep me quiet, dress it up all you want, but that's the goal, isn't it?" The representative cleared her throat. "You'll have full freedom, but under watch, with support, not the kind I asked for." She closed the door before another word was spoken. Later that night, she sat in bed, hand resting gently over her abdomen. The twins were only weeks along, but she already felt responsible for shaping the world they'd enter, and no amount of luxury would convince her to hide for anyone's comfort, especially not his. 3 days later, Evan called. She didn't pick up. He sent a message: "We need to talk. In person." She agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop she frequented, midday, crowded enough to prevent theatrics. He arrived precisely at 1. He looked tired, not unkempt, just less composed, like someone who hadn't been told no in a long time. They sat by the window. He didn't start with pleasantries. "Why are you refusing help?" Because help isn't the same as control. He leaned forward. This isn't control. This is protection. She stirred her drink calmly. Do you protect all the women you walk away from with legal documents, or just the ones who come back carrying a headline risk? He didn't answer. She placed her spoon down, looked him straight in the eye. You don't get to manage me, Evan. He tensed. Not now. Not ever again. You lost that right the moment you decided I was a problem to contain. That wasn't. Yes, it was. And I see you clearly now. She stood up. You want to be involved? Be a father, not a strategist. Show up. Be consistent. Be real. He looked up at her, unreadable. She softened, only slightly. But if you're here to negotiate another document, don't come back. And she left him sitting there, not with a scream, but with a sentence that shifted everything. Control was no longer his to hold. 2 weeks after the press conference collapse, Evan appeared again, this time not alone. The headline read, Tanner seen with longtime partner at gala fundraiser. The photo beneath it showed him walking alongside Isabella Morant, hand gently resting on her lower back. She wore a navy evening gown, hair swept back in an elegant chignon, lips curved in a camera-perfect smile. Isabella was everything society loved, crisp in speech, soft in tone, always dressed in colors that flattered both her and the lens. She moved with the practiced ease of someone raised in diplomacy and debutante halls. She and Evan had been on and off for years, the public never fully aware of the depth. But when she returned to New York, she made her presence known. Articles referred to her as an international consultant, philanthropic, strategist, and most recently, the woman beside the man. Within days, her image began appearing beside Evan's in corporate circles, on magazine covers and social announcements. Aisha watched it unfold quietly. It was intentional, and she knew it. Isabella entered the narrative like a correction, as if Aisha had been a glitch, and Isabella the solution. She didn't need Evan to say it. The statement was already being made in every publication, every interview, every photo op. A return to normal. A future that looked good on paper. A woman who fit the room. What the headlines didn't show was the space between them. At a technology summit, Evan and Isabella were photographed shaking hands with foreign investors. She smiled through every panel, sat front row during his keynote, and touched his shoulder at all the right times. But the footage Aisha found on a business blog told a different story. In between events, Evan walked ahead. Isabella kept pace, but never caught up. In one shot, he turned away just as she reached for his arm. In another, his expression stayed fixed while she laughed at something the photographer said. Publicly, they were coordinated. Privately, they were disconnected. Inside those images, Aisha saw the truth. Evan didn't look at Isabella the way he once looked at her, not even close. Still, that didn't matter to the world outside. Public perception had been corrected. Evan was no longer alone. He was respectable, settled, safe, and Isabella made sure to reinforce it. She began visiting events Aisha had once coordinated. She followed up with partners Evan hadn't spoken to in months. Her presence in his orbit was total. But something didn't add up. Aisha noticed the timing, the stories, the speed at which Isabella became his second skin. And she understood this wasn't love. This was optics. It became clearer the day Isabella reached out directly. Aisha received the message through her art studio's contact page. Would love to meet. Woman to woman. A conversation. Aisha agreed. Not out of curiosity, but clarity. They met at a boutique cafe downtown. Neutral territory. Isabella arrived dressed in a beige coat, gold studs in her ears, and the kind of confidence built in rooms Aisha never wanted to enter. Thank you for coming, Isabella said, sitting gracefully. Aisha stayed silent. This situation has gotten complex. It's not a situation. It's a pregnancy. Isabella blinked. Of course, and I respect that, which is why I wanted to speak directly. So speak. She leaned forward. You and Evan had a moment, and now there's consequence. Aisha didn't flinch. That's a convenient word. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to protect what we've built. You've built an image. Isabella didn't deny it. Evan and I are aligned in vision, strategy, reputation. We've spent years cultivating stability. He spent months ignoring mine. You want support. He wants the children safe. I want continuity. Aisha nodded slowly. So you're here to offer a package? A future where I disappear and the photo ops continue? I'm here to prevent a war. There is no war. There are only choices. And you made yours the moment you walked into a camera flash, holding a man who hadn't checked on the mother of his children. Isabella's smile faltered. Aisha stood. If you were smart, you wouldn't play games with someone who has nothing left to lose. The next day, Evan called. She didn't answer. Then, a letter arrived, handwritten, folded carefully. He apologized, not for the past, for the distance, the silence, for letting someone else set the tone. Aisha read it twice. Then she placed it in a drawer. She stood by her window, hand on her stomach, watching the city below. Taxi horns, brakes squealing, life moving forward. She whispered softly, "You will never feel like second place." The twins were her focus now, not Evan, not his legacy, not his polished arm candy who cared more for board seats than bedtime stories. Aisha returned to her painting. She built a registry with her closest friends. She hired a doula. She planned for the future without leaving space for old wounds. She would raise her children with honesty, with steadiness, with love not tied to power or presentation. And when the world asked why she walked away from wealth, she would answer with clarity, because peace is worth more. Because real love doesn't need press coverage to exist. Because no child should grow up wondering if they were part of a branding strategy. She shut the drawer and didn't open it again. Evan Tanner began watching from the sidelines, not as a CEO, not as a strategist, as a man trying to understand the kind of strength he had never been taught to value. Aisha never asked for help. He saw her from a distance at the clinic one morning, standing in line with her coat buttoned halfway, a paper folder tucked under her arm. No entourage, no assistant, just her. He had sent another car again. She hadn't used it. He had prepaid a private suite. She had declined. Every update he received came from second-hand channels. His team kept tabs, thinking he wanted leverage. But what he got instead was something else. Respect. Aisha attended every checkup, made her own appointments, researched her options. She read quietly in the waiting room while women beside her whispered. Some recognized her from the tabloids. Others just stared. She never flinched. She walked through the second trimester without complaint. When nausea returned, she didn't call anyone. She adjusted her routine. He watched her paint into the late hours. He knew because someone sent a photo from a gallery visit, her hands streaked in gold and black. Evan Tanner, whose empire was built on calculated moves, could not look away from a woman who did not need him. And for once, he didn't feel insulted by that. He felt pulled by it. There was no dramatic confrontation, no moment where she broke down or demanded anything. Aisha gave Evan nothing to fix, only the chance to observe. She worked odd hours, took commissions for nursery murals, held prenatal yoga sessions online from her apartment. Every dollar was tracked. Every move was hers. He sent her a text once, "How are you feeling?" She replied hours later, steady, not glowing, not exhausted. Steady. He stared at that word for a long time. She didn't wear her pain. She moved through it, quietly, with dignity. He asked himself if he would have handled things the same way if roles had been reversed. He already knew the answer. When his company had been under threat years ago, he leaned on every favor, every team, every investor. He had panic rooms built into his plans. Aisha had none of that. But she carried twins and a fractured history without showing cracks. He started pulling away from public events. He skipped one gala, then another. He cancelled a podcast appearance. He told his assistant, not now, because his focus had shifted. She wasn't waiting for him, but he wasn't willing to just observe anymore. The announcement broke mid-week. Evan Tanner and Isabella Morant end engagement. Private decision. Spokesperson says it hit news cycles with the speed only scandal can summon. Some blogs speculated infidelity. Others dug up Aisha's name again, tying her pregnancy back to the quiet unraveling. Evan didn't deny any of it. He released no statement beyond the basic PR line. What people didn't know, he ended it the night after watching Aisha exit the subway carrying groceries, one hand on her belly, one hand gripping her tote. He had gone home, looked at Isabella, and realized he didn't recognize the woman sitting across from him. Not because she was unfamiliar, because she was safe. And he was done living inside safety. When he told her, Isabella didn't cry. She didn't scream. She packed in silence, makeup brushes aligned in perfect rows. She knew. He didn't try to justify it. He let the consequences hit. Investors called. One board member scheduled an emergency meeting. Share prices dipped briefly. And for the first time in his career, Evan Tanner didn't care, because he had built a reputation off of detachment. Now, he was choosing presence, even if it cost him. It was raining again. Not Paris rain, New York rain. Heavy, loud, unapologetic. Aisha opened the door to find him standing on her porch. No umbrella, no tailored coat, just him. Soaked, still. She didn't speak. He did. I ended it. She nodded once. I saw. I should have shown up sooner. Yes, but I'm here now, not for a headline, not for damage control. His voice didn't waver. I want to be in their lives. I want to earn that. With consistency, not words. Aisha crossed her arms. And what about mine? He stepped closer. I want to be in your life too, not because of guilt, or fear, or public pressure. He looked her straight in the eyes. Because I never stop thinking about you. Because you deserve someone who chooses you, without needing to be chased. Rain hit the awning above them. A car passed behind, tires loud against the wet street. She studied his face, not searching for perfection, not hoping for a promise, just watching. He held her gaze. I won't push, he said. She stepped back, held the door open, and for the first time, he walked in with no conditions, only truth. The delivery room was quiet when the twins entered the world. No chaos, no flood of people, just focused hands, steady breath, and a clock on the wall that marked a new beginning. Aisha gripped the edge of the hospital bed as her final push brought Cairo into the world. 1 minute later, Amari followed. 2 cries, back to back, then stillness. She turned her head, exhausted, to see them placed side by side. Tiny fists, wrinkled skin, eyes barely open. The nurse glanced at her. 2 strong heartbeats. Beautiful boys. Tears slid down Aisha's cheeks, but she didn't sob. She reached out slowly and touched Cairo's shoulder, then Amari's tiny hand. Evan stood near the door at first. He hadn't expected her to let him in. She had. Only one rule. No interruptions, no control. Just presence. He honored it. When he stepped closer and saw their faces, something in him broke. Not from fear, from recognition. He saw pieces of himself. And something more. Something better. He didn't ask to hold them right away. He asked her, quietly. She nodded once. He picked up Cairo first. His arms shook slightly. Then he whispered, "Welcome," and meant every part of it. They didn't agree on everything, but they didn't have to. Aisha moved into a 2-bedroom apartment across the river. Evan covered the rent, but only after she set the condition. No staff, no cameras, no interference. He visited every night. At first, just for an hour. Then, longer. He learned fast how to change a diaper without panicking, how to heat formula just enough, how to walk the hall with Amari until he settled, how to hum low when Cairo stirred at midnight. Some nights she let him sleep on the couch. Other nights he left at 2 a.m., hair messy, shirt stained, shoes forgotten near the door. They became a unit, uneven but steady. When one was too tired, the other stepped in. No titles. Just 2 people figuring it out in real time. Once, At 4:43 a.m., Aisha whispered from the kitchen, "You're doing better than you think." He looked up, half asleep, one baby on his chest. "I'm trying. I see it." They didn't need big talks. They needed bottles, clean ones, and burp cloths, and 5 hours of sleep between them. Real intimacy wasn't about what they said. It was about who showed up and stayed. It happened one night while folding laundry. Cairo had been sick for 3 days. Amari wasn't sleeping. Aisha looked like she hadn't sat down in hours. Evan offered to stay over. She didn't answer. He stayed anyway. At 2:17 a.m., after Cairo finally dozed off, Evan sat on the floor, back against the couch, his head in his hands. "I don't know if I'm built for this," he whispered. Aisha didn't respond right away. He looked up. "I used to feel in control. In meetings, on stage, in everything." She sat beside him. "Control isn't the goal here. Then what is?" "Presence." He nodded. Slowly. "I feel like I'm breaking." "Maybe you are." He let out a soft laugh. Not amused, just tired. "You think that's a good thing?" "I think it's honest." Evan rested his head against the wall. "They don't know what I used to be." "Good. Let them meet who you're becoming." For the first time, he didn't need to perform. He cried quietly, not from failure, from trying and being seen in it. The days turned into weeks. The boys grew stronger, their cries sharper, their needs more demanding. And through it all, Evan stayed. Not perfectly, not always with the right words, but he stayed. Aisha watched. She didn't rush forgiveness, didn't hand it out like a favor. She let it come in pieces, in late-night tea refills, in quiet jokes, in the way he looked at their sons with awe, not possession. He never asked her where they stood. She never gave him a title. What they had was movement. Forward, measured, earned. One Saturday, while folding tiny clothes, he looked over and said, "I missed everything before. I don't want to miss what's next." She nodded. "Then show up for it." He didn't ask if she meant the children or herself. He understood it was both. Aisha didn't trust fast. She trusted patterns, behavior, presence over promises. And slowly, she let the guard down. He didn't try to tear through it. He waited. And one evening, as the boys slept and the city buzzed outside their window, she leaned her head on his shoulder. Nothing said, everything meant. That was how trust returned, not as a declaration, but as a choice, made over and over again. The first time Evan stepped into Aisha's studio, he didn't speak. He stood just inside the doorway, letting the scent of paint and varnish settle into his lungs. Sunlight poured through the wide windows, catching streaks of yellow, crimson, and deep blue across half-finished canvases. She kept her back to him, brush in hand, adding a final curve to a wide canvas pinned flat against the wall. "You left your shoes outside," she said. "You have a no-shoes rule." She smiled faintly but didn't turn. He stepped forward slowly, eyes moving across the space, organized chaos, brushes stored in old mason jars, a coffee mug full of turpentine, a bulletin board covered in color swatches and sketches. He spotted one of the pieces he'd seen in a local gallery catalogue. "This one sold, right?" "Twice," she replied. The buyer wanted a duplicate for their second home. He paused beside the work. "It deserves a bigger platform. It has one. I show where I choose." He nodded, respecting the boundary. Instead of pitching galleries or investing in exhibitions, he asked her what she needed. "Better lighting," she said, "and more drying space." By the next week, she had both, quietly delivered. No fanfare, no speeches, just presence. And when she began painting a new series called Becoming, he offered to fund the materials. She accepted, not because she needed him to, because this time it came without strings. Their new rhythm didn't announce itself. It grew, quietly, over takeout boxes and baby monitor checks. He started showing up at 7. She cooked some nights. Other nights, he brought things she used to mention offhand: grapefruit soda, sesame crackers, almond cookies from the corner shop. They talked about art, parenting, city noise, the way Amari hummed before sleep, how Cairo kicked when jazz played. Laughter returned, not loud at first, but real. One night, while washing dishes, she flicked water at him. He blinked, then retaliated with a splash. It turned into a soaked floor and a trail of wet footprints across the hallway. Later, she found him drying the twins' bottles with the same towel. "You missed a spot," she teased. He didn't defend himself, just grinned. When he laughed now, it reached his eyes. They shared blankets on the couch during stormy evenings, trading stories about their worst dates, best meals, and quiet regrets. He didn't try to fix the past. He stayed present in the now. And that was what changed everything. The twins were asleep. Rain tapped against the windows like a slow drum. Aisha stood barefoot in her studio, mixing colors for the final piece of her series. Evan watched her from the corner, leaning against the doorframe. He hadn't said much that night, just listened. She looked up, brow furrowed. "What?" "Nothing. You're just calm here." She wiped her hands on a stained cloth. "It's where I remember who I am." He stepped forward. "Can I show you something?" She raised an eyebrow. He pulled a small box from his jacket. No velvet, no logo, just a plain silver hinge. Her hands dropped to her sides. He didn't kneel. He didn't deliver a rehearsed speech. He held the box out and said, "You were never part of the plan. You were the part that made me see how empty the plan was." She didn't breathe. "I don't need this to fix anything. I need it to build something. From the ground. With you." The ring inside wasn't oversized. No dramatic shine. It looked like it belonged on her hand. Like it understood her fingers held brushes, bottles, babies. "You once said control wasn't the goal. Presence was." He looked at her. "Let me be present, as your partner, not just their father, yours." Paint still dotted her wrists. Her hair was pulled up. She hadn't worn makeup in days. She had never looked more like herself, or more loved. Aisha stared at the ring, then at him. She didn't rush, didn't reach. She let the moment settle. Then, softly, she stepped forward and closed the box. "You don't need a yes tonight." He blinked. "I want to give you one, but not because of timing or setting or effort." Her voice held steady. "Because I believe it, fully." She touched his chest, felt the rhythm beneath his ribs. "But I need to feel it in my body before I say it with my mouth." He nodded slowly. No disappointment, just understanding. 2 days later, she found him swaying with Cairo in the nursery, music low, feet barely moving. She walked in, barefoot, and held out her hand. He placed the baby down. She opened the same box. "I feel it now," she whispered, then added, with a quiet smile, "Yes." He didn't say anything. He pulled her in, and they stood there, slow dancing between 2 cribs, a ring between them, no audience, no headlines, just the truth they built, one night at a time. The gala wasn't small. Nothing hosted by the Newton Foundation ever was. But this time, it wasn't about press. It wasn't about strategy. It wasn't even about Tanner Enterprises. It was about showing up, together. Aisha stood near the grand staircase, dressed in a sleek black jumpsuit that allowed her to move easily between guests. Evan was beside her, not ahead of her, not behind her. Beside. Cairo and Amari were in matching charcoal vests, strapped securely to the front of their godmother and Evan's assistant, Sienna, who made faces and kept them calm through the noise. No more hiding, no more staged moments. Aisha held Evan's hand when they entered the room, not to prove anything, just because it was real. A few heads turned, a few whispers followed, but no one dared ask the question out loud, because there was no scandal left to chase, no secrecy to uncover. What they showed that night wasn't perfection. It was earned unity, a family, one that didn't arrive to impress, but to exist. Evan hadn't planned to speak, but when the keynote panel ended early and the host invited him to the mic, he stood up. He didn't ask for notes. He didn't clear it with PR. He just walked to the stage. Aisha watched from the second row, arms crossed, lips pressed together. He adjusted the mic. I've spent the past decade perfecting every move, polishing my image, avoiding headlines unless I could write them myself. The room went still. I built something impressive, but I lived inside a version of myself that was safe, guarded, and honestly small. He glanced down. Then two things happened. I failed someone who never asked me for anything, and I became a father. A few quiet breaths moved through the audience. Those two things stripped everything I thought I knew. Not because they were hard, but because they were honest. His voice softened. Today, I don't stand here as a tech innovator or CEO. I stand here as a man who was forced to confront the gap between who he was and who he wants to be. He looked at Aisha, and I am proud of that gap, because filling it changed me. Applause came slowly, not polite, moved. He left the stage without waiting for photos. Aisha met him at the steps. You did that without rehearsing. He smirked. I'm learning. Weeks later, the press release hit industry news. Tanner Clark Initiative launches fund for single mothers entering tech fields. What began as a conversation over dinner became a mission. Aisha had once told Evan, resources mean nothing if the doors stay shut. He asked, what would opening them look like? She drew it on a napkin. Mentorship, grant access, affordable certification tracks, childcare support for working mothers. They didn't want to build another scholarship with a ribbon-cutting photo. They wanted something real. So they co-founded it. Together, Aisha managed the creative and outreach arms. Evan used his network to secure funding and corporate backing. Within the first month, they placed 17 women in paid apprenticeships with flexible schedules. The first woman hired cried when told she could bring her toddler to on-site daycare. Aisha cried later that night too. Not from stress, from purpose. Evan sat beside her, watching the boys sleep. Thank you for not letting me just write a check, he said. She nodded. Impact isn't in the headline, it's in the follow-through. And they followed through. Every week, every email, every life touched. Love didn't erupt for them. It unfolded. Evan learned to pack lunch bags, to remember formula types, to sit on the floor and build towers only to let Cairo knock them down. He kissed Aisha on the forehead before board calls. She adjusted his tie before public panels. They didn't post their milestones. They lived them. The proposal wasn't viral. The wedding, when it came, was private, held in a rooftop garden with 20 chairs and 2 sleeping babies in white onesies. Aisha didn't walk down an aisle. She stood barefoot beside him. No speeches, just a vow whispered between them. Show up. Every day. They fought sometimes, about bedtime schedules, about her wanting more gallery time, about his habit of reading emails during dinner, but they repaired quickly, because now they both knew how to. The twins turned 1 in spring. They held hands while the boys smashed cake into their mouths. Evan leaned close and whispered, "This is everything." Aisha nodded, tears threatening. She whispered back, "No headlines. Just home." That's how it lasted. Not with noise, but with rhythm, and with love that never needed to prove itself again. The gallery walls were bare, white, and humming with quiet anticipation. Aisha stood in the center of the room, fingers stained from a morning of touch-ups. Her newest collection, Edges and Echoes, was scheduled to open in 4 weeks. This was not a side feature. This wasn't a shared wall in a group exhibit. This was her name, alone, etched into the thick cardstock on the invitation, Aisha Clark. She flipped through the contract again. Her name, typed cleanly on every page. No assistant credit, no fine print tying her to another name, company, or sponsor. Just her. The gallery manager approached, smiling. Ready to make it official? She nodded and signed, pen gliding across paper with quiet pride. Years ago, she would have second-guessed herself. She would have wondered if she deserved it, if her work had meaning, if she was standing in a space someone else gave her. Not anymore. This time, she built it, and earned every square foot of the walls that would hold her vision. She pressed the pen down firmly on the final signature line. Done. The front door creaked open. Evan appeared in the doorway, slightly breathless, jacket half zipped. He held 2 juice boxes in one hand, a backpack looped over his shoulder, and a baby bottle sticking out of his coat pocket. Behind him, Cairo toddled forward, one sock slipping off his foot. Amari clutched a small toy hammer, waving it like a victory flag. "Sorry," Evan said, eyes scanning the gallery space. Parking was a war zone. Aisha smirked. "You parked 1 block away." "Exactly. War zone." She stepped forward, taking the bag from him, then crouched to fix Cairo's sock. Amari squealed and ran toward the empty platform in the center of the room. "We signed," she said quietly. Evan glanced at the desk, saw the papers and smiled. "You did it. We did nothing." "I did." He laughed. "Correction accepted." He leaned in, kissed her cheek, then handed over the juice boxes like sacred offerings. "I bribed them with these. Not my proudest parenting move." She opened one, poked the straw through, and handed it to Cairo. "Survival counts." They sat on the bench in the corner as the boys explored, the gallery lights casting soft shadows around them. This wasn't a preview. It was real life, and they were in it. Together. Evan watched as Aisha spoke to the gallery team, explaining the layout plan for her exhibit. She didn't seek his input. She didn't ask if he approved, and he didn't expect her to. Their dynamic had changed long before today. It began the day he stopped asking for grace and started showing up with actions. Aisha didn't forget the past, but she didn't live in it either. When people brought it up, the press scandal, the collapse, the early tension, she didn't deny it. She acknowledged it, then returned to the present. "Yes, we started with a lie, but we built something true. They didn't pretend it was perfect. They took turns. They argued. They laughed. They learned to say what they meant instead of what sounded nice." Aisha told Evan when she needed quiet. Evan told Aisha when he felt insecure. No masks. No power plays. Just 2 people raising children, building purpose, and committing to clarity. She didn't shrink herself to fit into his life. He expanded his to fit into hers. It wasn't romantic in the way movies sold it. It was better, because it was real. Later that night, the boys asleep, the contract filed, the lights off. They stood in the studio. The smell of paint lingered. The silence was full, not empty. Evan leaned against the doorway, watching her move a canvas back into position. She looked over her shoulder. "Why are you staring?" "Because you're not temporary anymore." She turned fully to him. "I never was." He smiled. She stepped closer, rested her head on his chest. They stood like that for a long time. No announcement, no title, just truth. She whispered into the quiet. Some scandals expose shame, others expose truth. This one exposed a love that survived control, fear, and silence. And this time, there was no press around to hear it. Only each other. To everyone watching, there will be moments in your life where you feel dismissed, overlooked, or treated like a placeholder in someone else's story. But hear this clearly. You are not temporary. You are not replaceable. And you are not defined by the people who failed to see your worth. Aisha didn't beg to be seen. She built a life that made her impossible to ignore. She didn't demand validation, she created value. And when love finally came, it met her where she was, not where she had to shrink to fit. So if you're in a season where you feel unseen or underestimated, don't chase approval. Chase growth. Chase peace. Chase your purpose with the same quiet strength she did. Because one day, the people who couldn't recognize your light will wish they had stood closer. And when that moment comes, you won't need revenge. You'll be too busy living the life you built with your own hands. If this story touched you, drop A in the comments and tell us what part spoke to your soul. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind you you were never the backup plan. You've always been the masterpiece.